4 miles south of Half Moon Bay sits an empty town site that was once projected to become one of the largest coastal communities in San Mateo County. Known as Purissima, sometimes spelled with either one or two S's, the location is now a ghost town with only a recently renovated cemetery, hidden concrete foundations, and unnaturally situated eucalyptus trees indicating its existence. In this video, we're going to take a look into the history of Purissima, from its conception to its disappearance and current status. The first residents in the location of the Purissima area were Ohlone Native Americans. The earliest recorded history of the area, taken from the Spanish Portola expedition in 1769, mentions that just north of Purissima Creek, abandoned structures were observed which were from the Tarosi village of the Ohlone people. While relatively small in size, Purissima Creek has been noted as having an abundant fish supply, something that likely drew Native Americans to the area. Furthermore, local guides to the Portola expedition explain that the village residents likely moved east into the mountains. During this expedition, the creek was named San Ivo. It was not until the later establishment of the San Francisco Mission that the creek and area was renamed Purissima. It is speculated that the area was renamed in the 1770s by Spanish missionaries stationed at the San Francisco Mission. The name, which translated to English means the purest, was an expression of the area's pure and natural beauty. In the 1850s, shortly after California had become part of the United States, Americans began arriving at the coast in present Half Moon Bay, known then as Spanishtown. With Spanishtown largely settled already by the time California became a state, many arrived to the area with the intention of leasing and farming the land. Others, however, arrived as squatters and engaged in conflict with landowners who would drive these individuals away through force. This, combined with the Hispanic ethnic identity of the town, led to the new wave of Anglo settlers seeking to establish a community of their own. Roughly 4 miles south of Spanishtown, there was an area of land that's ownership status was somewhat vague. The squatters and new Anglo settlers decided to take advantage of the land grab and ended up occupying the space. Furthermore, with the incorporation of California to the United States, the new Anglo settlers had U.S. law on their side to leverage their land claims. This new community would be the base of what would become the town of Purissima. Shortly after, new businesses began to pop up, such as the White Sulphur Springs roughly 3 miles inland, a sawmill which was also closer to the mouth of the canyon, various farms, a blacksmith shop, a general store, and a hotel known as the Purissima House, the owner of which was killed in a whaling accident in 1865, leaving his wife, Mary Bazell, to run the business by herself for some years. A schoolhouse was erected around the same time, as well a place called Fairmont Park, which held pleasure parties, where attendees could dance and relax among the redwoods. Even though the town was well established into the mid-1860s, many credit the arrival of Henry Dobbel, a wealthy German immigrant who made most of his fortunes at his restaurant in San Francisco, as the start of the most significant advancement of the town of Purissima. Shortly after purchasing 1,000 acres of land in 1868 from John Purcell, who also donated some of his land for the local cemetery, Henry would build an elaborate 17-room mansion near the bank of the Purissima Creek. Not only did he have employees to help run the estate, but he also hired an additional 50 men to help grow and harvest crops such as wheat, barley, and potatoes. During this era, he would invest in the town, significantly improving its infrastructure. From the arrival of Mr. Dobbel in 1868 to the mid-1880s, this was the golden era of Purissima, when many expected the town to continuously grow and prosper. While Henry Dobbel would bring more jobs to the town and further establish its presence, Purissima's heyday would only last a couple of decades. Henry would end up purchasing the local general store in the 1880s and ran generous lines of credit to residents to support local business. Even though Mr. Dobbel was significantly wealthy, he ended up spreading himself too thin when his crop harvests began to fail in consecutive years. The combination of overextending credit and bad crop yields would eventually lead to bankruptcy. After foreclosing on his properties in 1890, most of his estate would be auctioned off. Henry Cowell, another wealthy local landowner who now has a state park in the Santa Cruz Mountains named after him, would be the only one who ended up bidding on his estate. Sadly, 1 year later Mr. Dobbel would pass away. His elaborate grave still stands in the town cemetery. The bankruptcy of Henry Dobbel and his soon after death would effectively extinguish the flame of Purissima's development. With this being said, local industries such as logging, oil production, and the Ocean Shore Railroad were anticipated to fuel further growth of the town outside of Dobbel's involvement. However, each of these proved to be short-lived or not viable in the long run. While one of the earliest industries in the area, logging in the Santa Cruz Mountains would slow down greatly into the turn of the 20th century, especially that on the west side of the mountains, which required lumber to be gulched out at a much higher labor cost. The oil boom in the 1880s was a product of a much wider statewide boom in California. Oil was indeed found in Purissima, but the excitement was brief as production started around 35 barrels per day, but quickly tapered off to less than 10 barrels per day, not enough to continue exploration in the area. The Ocean Shore Railroad was a coastal rail line planned to connect San Francisco and Santa Cruz. The full route was never completed, with only separate north and south lines being constructed in 1906. Purissima was the second to last stop on the North Line, connecting it directly with San Francisco. However, by the time the line was introduced, the town was already in significant decline. The new connection was not enough to jumpstart the local economy. Unfortunately, the rail line never picked up significant popularity, and operation ceased in 1920. While not confirmed, the last records of a business operating in Purissima point to the Purissima House, which was actually one of the earliest businesses in the area. It last functioned as a hotel, saloon, and restaurant, catering towards visitors to the town. The Purissima House took regular ads in local papers into the 1910s, but stopped altogether by 1920. While people were still living in the area up to this point, the town was essentially defunct by the end of World War II. A handful of empty buildings remained in the area into the 1940s, such as the Village Blacksmith, Doherty's Saloon, and the Purissima House Hotel. However, the third Purissima schoolhouse was the last remaining structure in town, with records indicating it was still standing into the 1960s. Today, the cemetery, rows of eucalyptus trees, and tucked-away concrete foundations are the only indicators that there was ever a town in the area. It's speculated that the concrete foundations are from the water tower of Henry Dobbel's estate, but this has not been proven. As for development of the area, in the 1960s, there were plans to build a new coastal campus for the College of San Mateo over the original Townsite, but the plan never came to fruition. It is worth noting that according to public records, San Mateo Community College District does currently own nearly all land in Purissima north of Verde Road. So who knows, maybe there will be a new community college in Purissima in the future. As for the main portion of the town site, south of Verde Road, the Coastside Land Trust was granted the land from the California Coastal Conservancy around 2010, and regularly hosts tours of the former town site. If you're wanting an immersive deep dive on the town, check out their website or Facebook page to look for future tour dates. The cemetery, which was originally donated by John Purcell, eventually fell into the hands of a group of individuals who had friends and family buried there. The group was called the Purissima Cemetery Association. In the 1960s, the association lost the property rights to the cemetery due to a tax dispute. From that point to the 2010s, the ownership of the cemetery was somewhat ambiguous as no one had claimed it. In 2017, a real estate investor and green burial entrepreneur from the East Coast filed a notice of claim of possession for the cemetery, also known as adverse possession. essentially paying the back taxes and claiming the property as his own. Shortly after, his company, Steelman Town Cemetery Company, began conducting green burials at the historic graveyard. Since the acquisition of the property, San Mateo County and the Coastside Land Trust have issued legal complaints for various reasons, mainly for lack of permits for development of the land and conducting of burials themselves. According to an online article, the president of the Coastside Land Trust stated in 2018 that, "We just want the appropriate processes to be followed to make sure he's staying on his land and not coming onto ours." The main standpoint of the Steelman Town Cemetery Company is that due to the age of the cemetery, the property should be grandfathered in and should not require permits for development or burials. In addition to the Coastside Land Trust's complaints, locals have claimed that the Steelman Town Cemetery Company has not been taking the correct steps of conducting a historical assessment of the land and may be conducting new burials on top of existing historic unmarked graves. This is speculation, though, as I have not found any proof of this. With this being said, it's definitely worth noting that during the Steelman Town Cemetery Company's ownership, they have greatly improved the appearance of the cemetery, removing weeds, building trails and ramps, as well generally maintaining the grounds. Up to this point, the cemetery was largely overgrown and not really taken care of. What is really interesting is that in 2010, there was an article published that the Coastside Land Trust was interested in conducting green burials themselves. This was 7 years before the cemetery was acquired by a separate entity. It seems to be too much of a coincidence that two separate entities were thinking about starting a green burial site at the same location at the same time. It's more strange that the Coastside Land Trust, who had their eye on the site 7 years prior to its acquisition, was not able to secure it, even though they had been granted the Townsite, west of the cemetery, from the state of California. Regardless, the Steelman Town Cemetery Company is still actively conducting green burials at the site, so whatever issues presented themselves have been solved or are being resolved in court. The future of Purissima is uncertain, but it will be interesting to see if any new developments occur over time. I highly recommend anyone interested to check out the site in person. It's astonishing how little trace of human activity is present in the area. With that being said, we've reached the end of the video. I'd like to thank everyone who made it this far. Please keep an eye out for future videos as we plan to start uploading far more consistently. Thanks again.